They always called me strong. Strong because I didn't cry, because I never missed a day, because I endured everything in silence. And I believed it. I believed this was my greatest virtue, my shining armor. I was the rock, the pillar, the person everyone ran to when their world was collapsing. Because mine, apparently, never wavered. I smiled, I agreed, I solved. I swallowed the tears, the frustration, the exhaustion. I was the personification of resilience. At least that's what I told myself. But the truth is, beneath that armor, there was a crack, a tiny fissure that, with every "I'm fine," I said without feeling it, every sleepless night I ignored, every palpitation I blamed on coffee, grew wider. I became an expert in repression, in dissociation, in putting my own pain into a box, locked with 7 keys in the basement of my soul. The problem was, I didn't know that box was leaking. And what was leaking wasn't sound. It wasn't tears. It was poison. A slow poison that began to seep into my body. Today, I want to talk to you. You who are listening to me right now, and who might see yourself in this role. You who force yourself to smile when you're broken inside. Who thinks that stopping is a sign of weakness. Who believes that enduring in silence is noble. I'm here to tell you my story, because I need you to listen to yourself before your body has to scream. And it will scream. Mine did, and its scream almost destroyed me. My name is Clara. I'm 38 years old. On the outside, my life looked like a model of success and stability. A solid career as a project manager, a circle of friends who considered me the mom of the group, a family that was proud of my strength. I was the person who organized, who planned, who always had a solution. If a project at work was on fire, I was the one they called. If a friend broke up with her partner, it was my shoulder she cried on. If my parents needed help, I dropped everything and went. And I did it all with a smile, with a calmness that impressed everyone. But what no one saw was what happened afterward. When I closed the door to my apartment, the mask came off. The silence of the house was deafening. I felt like a completely drained battery, with no energy left even to make dinner. It started with insomnia. I would lie in bed and my mind would race. I'd revisit every problem I had solved for others, every harsh word I had swallowed, every tight deadline I had met. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't shut down. I told myself it was stress, that it was normal. It's just a phase, I repeated like a mantra. Then came the palpitations. In the middle of a meeting, my heart would suddenly start pounding uncontrollably, as if it wanted to leap out of my chest. A wave of heat would rush through my body. My hands would turn cold and clammy. I'd hide it, take a deep breath, drink a glass of water, and carry on. Anxiety, the doctor said. You need to relax. He gave me a prescription, but I didn't want to depend on pills. I was strong, remember? I could control this on my own, but I couldn't. The shortness of breath became my constant companion. Sometimes I'd just be sitting at my desk and suddenly feel as if an invisible weight was on my chest, preventing me from taking a full breath. I'd go to the window, try to gasp for air, feeling a rising panic, and the pain. A dull, persistent ache in my chest and back. I did all the tests, heart, lungs, everything. The results always came back normal. It's muscular, they'd say. Tension. I didn't know who I was anymore. Where was that strong, in-control woman? I felt fragile, scared, broken, and the worst part was the shame. How could I admit to the people who saw me as a pillar that I was crumbling inside? How could I explain that I, the rock, was feeling like sand? So I continued in silence. I smiled even wider, worked even harder, helped even more. I was desperately trying to run away from myself. The origin of this strength wasn't born from nothing. It was forged in my childhood. I'm the eldest daughter. From an early age, I heard the phrase, "You need to set an example." My father worked a lot, and my mother, though present, was an emotionally fragile person who was easily overwhelmed. I learned, very early on, that my needs, my pains, my fears were a burden to her. I remember one time, I must have been about 8. I fell at school and scraped my knee badly. I came home crying, showing her the blood. My mother's first reaction was panic. "Oh my God, Clara, you scared me. Don't show up looking like that." The focus wasn't on my pain, but on her fright. In that moment, a switch flipped in my head. My suffering bothers others. It's better not to show it. As a teenager, I became everyone's confidant. My friends told me about their relationship dramas, their problems with their parents. I would listen for hours, give advice, offer my shoulder. But I never talked about myself. No one ever asked either. The role was already set. I was the listener, the counselor, the strong one. I felt useful, important, but at the same time, invisible. I longed for someone to look at me and ask, "And you, Clara? How are you really?" But that question never came, and I learned not to wait for it. This dynamic solidified in my adult life. I became an exemplary professional because I never said no. I absorbed projects, responsibilities, problems that weren't mine, and I was praised for it. "Clara will handle it. Clara can do it." These compliments were like a drug. They fed my need to be seen as competent, as indispensable. But the price was my own life, my own health. I was building my identity on my ability to endure, without realizing that I was actually building my own prison. The breaking point, my body's scream, came on an ordinary Tuesday. I was at the supermarket, pushing the cart, thinking about the endless to-do list waiting for me. Suddenly, the light in the aisle seemed too bright. The sounds became muffled. My heart raced. The shortness of breath hit with a force I had never felt before, and an overwhelming dizziness took over. I had to grab onto the cart to keep from falling. I was absolutely certain that I was dying, that I was having a heart attack right there in the canned goods aisle. It was the most violent panic attack of my life. Someone helped me. They called an ambulance. At the hospital, after all the tests, the verdict was the same as always. Your heart is perfect. It was a severe anxiety attack. But for me, something had changed. That wasn't just a panic attack. It was an ultimatum. It was my body, my soul, screaming in unison. "Enough! If you won't stop, I will stop you." And it did. That night, lying in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt completely defeated. The strong woman armor had shattered, and all that was left was Clara. A scared, exhausted, and sick Clara. And for the first time in years, I cried. I cried for the little girl who learned to swallow her pain, for the teenager who felt invisible, for the woman who annihilated herself to be loved. I cried until I had no tears left. It was in this state of complete surrender that the change began. A friend, the only one who saw the gravity of the situation beyond just anxiety, visited me the next day. She didn't give me advice. She didn't say, "You're strong, you'll get through this." She just sat next to me and handed me a book. The cover was simple. The title was Man and His Symbols. The author was Carl Gustav Jung. I had never heard of him. "Read this," she said. "I think you'll find yourself in here." That night, I started to read, and in the very first pages, a sentence struck me like a bolt of lightning. "Whatever is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate." I read it again and again. Fate. My illness, my attacks. They weren't bad luck. They weren't a failure of my body. They were my fate. They were the direct result of everything I had refused to face. I kept reading voraciously, and then I found the concept of the shadow. Jung said that the shadow is the part of ourselves that we repress, that we deem undesirable. It holds our weaknesses, our sadness, our anger, our vulnerability, everything I had spent a lifetime locking away. He explained that when we deny the shadow, it doesn't disappear. It projects itself outward or it turns inward, attacking the body. My pain, ignored, had turned into disease. My body wasn't failing me. It was speaking the truth my mind refused to acknowledge. It was the most terrifying and liberating realization of my life. Reading those words, I felt a profound shift inside me. It was as if someone had finally given a name to the invisible monster that had been haunting me for years. My strength was, in fact, my greatest weakness. It was a mask, a persona, another of Jung's concepts. The capable Clara, the unflappable pillar of strength, wasn't the real me. It was a carefully constructed character I played to survive, to earn love and approval. I had played the part so well for so long that I had forgotten who I was underneath it. The real Clara, the one who felt sad, tired, and scared, was locked away in the shadow, and she was now rattling the bars of her cage through my body. This new understanding was a map to a territory I had been too afraid to explore, my own inner world. I realized I couldn't walk this path alone. I needed a guide, someone who understood this new language Jung was teaching me. I sought recommendations and, after a few calls, found a therapist who specialized in a Jungian approach. Booking that first session was one of the scariest and most hopeful things I had ever done. I was ready to start excavating the ruins of myself. Therapy was like descending into a dark cave with a small flashlight. At first, the fear was palpable. Each session was a step deeper, a confrontation with the parts of me I had hidden for so long. My dreams became a fertile ground for discovery. Before, I barely remembered them. Now, they were vivid, filled with symbols and encrypted messages. I dreamed of houses with locked basements, of being chased by a formless shadow, and frequently of a smaller version of myself, crying alone in a corner. My therapist helped me decipher them, revealing the hidden fears, the repressed anger, and the constant presence of my wounded inner child. These dreams were a mirror to the pain I carried. I also began the practice of therapeutic writing. My journal became my sanctuary. There, I could finally give voice to my most repressed emotions. I wrote about the rage I felt when a colleague took credit for my work, about the deep sadness that washed over me when I felt lonely, about the overwhelming exhaustion of maintaining the persona of the perfect and helpful daughter. It was in my journal that my shadow manifested freely. I realized that the perfection I so diligently sought was, in fact, a prison built by my own hands, at the behest of a family system that taught me that my authentic feelings were an inconvenience. Therapy helped me identify the complexes that operated within me. The most prominent was the mother complex. I understood that, since childhood, I had been desperately seeking my mother's approval, projecting onto her the figure of the ultimate authority, whose love and recognition were the currency for my existence. Even in my adult relationships with bosses and friends, I was repeating the pattern, seeking this same validation. Linked to this was the martyr complex. I often put myself in the position of the one who sacrifices everything for others, secretly hoping to be saved or recognized for my suffering, which only perpetuated a cycle of helplessness. I understood that these complexes were activated in situations where I felt my value was being questioned, leading me to give in and negate myself. In a particularly intense session, as I spoke about the difficulty of saying no, of setting boundaries, of prioritizing myself, my therapist asked me a simple question. "Clara, what are you afraid would happen if you showed your vulnerability?" I hesitated. The answer came out in a whisper. "They would leave. They would see I'm not strong, and they wouldn't need me anymore." She nodded gently. "So your worth is tied to your utility?" That question hung in the air. And suddenly, I saw it with crystal clarity. I wasn't afraid of being weak. I was afraid of being worthless. This process of psychological differentiation was painful. I began to understand that my mother's fragility, my father's absence, my friends' demands, they weren't about me. They were about their own wounds, their own shadows they couldn't integrate. I started to detach my identity from their expectations. I was not responsible for their happiness or their harmony. It was a process of grief, of mourning the perfect daughter and perfect friend I would never be, and at the same time, of celebrating the authentic Clara I was beginning to discover. Each insight was a brick falling from the wall that surrounded me, a painful but immensely liberating process. I was finally learning to breathe on my own. My inner journey led me to deep, sometimes frightening places, but it also brought me clarity. And then came the dream. It was vivid, palpable, and it etched itself into my mind with a force that transcended sleep. I was standing on the edge of a calm, dark lake. On the other side, I could see a version of myself, radiant and healthy, waving at me. But the lake was frozen over with a thick sheet of ice. I knew the ice was all my repressed emotions, my unshed tears, my unspoken truths. I was terrified to step on it, afraid it would crack and I would drown in the cold darkness. As I stood there, paralyzed by fear, the shadow figure from my other dreams appeared beside me. But this time, it wasn't chasing me. It simply pointed to the ice. And I understood. The only way to the other side was to go through. I had to feel the cold, risk the cracking, to reach my whole self. When I woke up, the feeling of epiphany was overwhelming. The ice was my pain. The radiant woman was my true self, my potential for wholeness. And the shadow? It was my guide, the part of me that knew I had to face the darkness to find the light. It was the moment of individuation, the realization that I needed to be the totality of myself, integrating my light and my shadow, and not just the persona that pleased the world. Driven by this insight, a firm inner decision took hold of me. It wasn't anger, it wasn't revenge, but a nascent self-love, an irrepressible desire to live my truth. I would free myself from the past. I would no longer make sacrifices that undermined my mental and emotional health. This decision was an act of immense courage because I knew it meant disappointing some people, especially those who benefited from my old strength. I began to plan concrete actions. It was as if, for the first time in my life, I was in command of my own ship. The first step would be to restructure my work schedule. I would set clear boundaries with my colleagues and my boss. Then, an unnegotiable commitment to myself. Dedicate daily time to my well-being. It was no longer a luxury, but a necessity. Meditation, gentle walks, reading for pleasure, and finally, the most dreaded conversations with my friends and with my mother. It wouldn't be an angry confrontation, but a calm and assertive expression of my needs, of my new priority. It was time to rewrite the script of my own life. The decision was made, and the initial fear began to give way to a different kind of adrenaline, a serene excitement. It was time to act, to turn theory into practice. Freedom, I was discovering, wasn't a gift, but a daily construction. At work, the first opportunity arose almost immediately. A massive, high-stress project landed on our team, and my boss immediately looked to me. "Clara, I need you to lead this. I know you can handle it." The old Clara would have said yes in a heartbeat, despite knowing it would mean sleepless nights and overwhelming stress. But I took a deep breath, remembering the frozen lake. With a calmness that surprised even me, I said, "I can co-lead it, but I can't take it on by myself. My current workload is at capacity, and I need to ensure I can deliver quality without compromising my health." There was a moment of stunned silence. But then, my boss nodded. "Okay," he said. "Let's find a co-lead." A small no to overwork was a huge yes to myself. In my personal life, I started saying no to invitations that didn't energize me. I explained to my friends that I needed more quiet time to recharge. Some were surprised, a few were even hurt. "But we always count on you," one said. "I know," I replied gently, "and I love you for it. But right now, I need to count on myself." And that's how I enrolled in a painting class. Something I had always wanted to do, that spoke to my soul, but for which I never had time. The first time I put a brush to canvas, I felt a pure, forgotten joy, a deep connection to the creativity I had suppressed. The conversation with my mother was the most challenging. I sat with her, my heart pounding, but with a quiet determination. It wasn't an accusation, but a declaration. "Mom," I began, my voice firm despite the trembling in my hands. "I love you very much. But I need to tell you that I'm learning to take better care of myself, which means I can't be available to solve every problem anymore." She looked at me with surprise, a slight hurt in her eyes. "What do you mean, Clara? I've always taken care of you." I continued, explaining that I needed to set boundaries, that my time and energy also needed to be dedicated to myself. "I love you, but I need to take care of myself too," I said. There was no explosion, no shouting, but a firmness that had not existed in my voice before. The most significant confrontation, however, was internal. Every time I said no to someone, the old guilt tried to cling to me, whispering words of selfishness. But now, I welcomed it, like a scared child, and then let it go. I reminded myself of my new priority, of the Clara who was blossoming. Feeling the lightness of a free afternoon, dedicated entirely to painting, smelling the turpentine, and the concentration of creating something with my own hands. I smiled. It's real, I thought, with a joy that filled me completely. The physical symptoms didn't disappear overnight, but they became less frequent, less intense. The panic attacks subsided. The constant ache in my chest lessened. My body was slowly learning to trust me again. It was learning that I was finally listening. I was no longer at war with myself. Today, I still face challenges. Life hasn't become a bed of roses, but now I have the tools, the inner anchors, to deal with them. I understand that the journey of individuation is continuous, a lifelong endeavor. But now, I have a map and an inner compass. The pain of the past hasn't been forgotten, but it has been resignified. It was the messenger. It was the scream that woke me up. The past has become a foundation, a solid base upon which I build my present and future, and no longer a prison I tried to escape. My body was not my enemy. It was my most loyal friend, the one who screamed for help when my voice was silent. And by finally listening to it, I didn't just heal my body. I saved my soul. I didn't run from who I was. I became who I was meant to be. And on this journey of prioritizing myself, I discovered that true strength isn't about how much you can endure in silence, but about how bravely you can listen to your own truth.